Welcome to the ATA podcast, where we talk to former elite athletes sharing their insights and wisdom derived from successfully transitioning into life beyond the game. A very warm welcome to the Athlete Transition Accelerator podcast. Unfortunately, Carl can't be with us today, but I'm delighted to be joined by Paula Jackson. Now, Paula is a former Army veteran, a double Olympian, a proud mum, and somebody who's had a fascinating sporting role that I'm genuinely intrigued to ask about, Paula, a bobsleigh pilot. Now, we've all seen Cool Runnings, but I'm sure you're going to give us an insight into the real nuts and bolts of actually that fearful, and I'm sure it is fearful, role of being a bobsleigh pilot. So a very warm welcome, and thank you for sharing your time with us today.
Oh, thank you ever so much. I feel like you've bigged me up a bit too much now. I hope I meet your expectations.
Not at all. As long as everything I've said so far is correct, because occasionally our research is wrong. So as long as you don't tell me, well, I wasn't a bobsleigh pilot, and so we're okay so far. Good.
Well
Now,
done.
obviously, the podcast, Paul, is very much about transition. Everybody who listens will know that we dive into that journey and what comes in the sort of next chapter. But it's lovely to always set the scene with our guests and just take them back into that sporting world. Obviously, you've been in world championships, you've been in European championships, double, Olympics, as I said in the intro. So there'll be a raft of things that you could pick out. But if you had to pull out one or two memories for us that just really elicit a sense of pride now that you're no longer hurtling down the ice, what comes to mind when you reflect back on that career and that sporting chapter?
Gosh, I mean, it's a decade of my life, so there's lots of mini kind of successes that I hold. But I think the main one is always going to be, qualifying for my first Olympics. That was it was the pinnacle of what I felt sport was at back then. I was quite
Yes.
young as well. So obviously that was massive. But I think prior to that, I'd won a junior world championships and I was the first British female to do that.
Fabulous.
And what made it special really was bobsleigh is well funded at the moment. It's not for everybody, and back then there was a lot of self-funding. So I'd gone through a self-funding journey. I was supported by TAS and in the end UK Sport, but at that time it was very it was all pinned on this race, and the pressure that I felt
Wow.
was probably as much as it was for the Olympics. So when we brought home the gold for that, it triggered UK sports funding. It triggered all sorts of things in the background that, as an athlete, I didn't really understand so much. But for me, that was like the cherry on the top. And I think because my dad was so seriously ill at the time as well, I had a decision to make whether I go to the World Junior Championships and try and make history and get all this funding, or do I go at home? And I think so.
Mhm.
Those two key kind of success stories for me are really important, even though there was many over the 10 years that I'd competed.
I love that. And we'll circle back a little bit later about transferable skills because dealing with pressure is undoubtedly one. And you've given us a fabulous
Yeah.
insight into pressure there. I suppose this is just me personally indulging the opportunity to ask you questions, but you've got to have a real degree of courage, I imagine, to actually step in. And when we were doing the research, you started out, I think, at the back, being the
Yeah.
brake woman, and then you moved up to being a pilot. I can only imagine what the adrenaline must be like to actually do that. What was the fear like for you the first time you stepped into that? Or was that something that you were able to control very quickly and it wasn't so much fear, you were focused and you were just in the zone? Because as an outsider looking in, it looks pretty intense.
Yeah, I mean, look, brave and stupidity are on the same kind of axes, aren't they? I think so. Some people would say brave, some people would say stupid. I think, when I first went to a bobsleigh, it was within the military, and I was indeed in the back. And credit to all brakemen on any bobsleigh team in the world. It's an awful journey unless you've got a really good pilot. So my first kind of understanding of bobsleigh was it hurts like hell. What an awful ride. Why do people do this? I was
Yeah.
like, my mind boggles. But the adrenaline that you get at the bottom. I think what I struggled with being in the back was the lack of control. Okay, so
Mhm.
all of my safety, my life was given to the pilot, and that was really difficult for me. I'm a bit of a control freak. I think most athletes are. So that's kind of why I progressed to be a pilot. It was not anything to do with aptitude of driving. It was just a hunt for
Yeah.
I want control, and that's the way that I can gain it.
So you pushed your way to the front and the rest was history. I love it. Now, again, as with every guest, there's so much fascination in that sporting chapter. You could spend the whole time talking about it. But give us a little bit of a flavour. Obviously, you retired from that. I know you're very proud. You're a mum of three now, and you've stepped out of the military. So we always like to sort of just get a flavour from our guests. What are you doing now? And just give us a sort of a sort of 30,000 foot view of how did that transition evolve? Did you step straight into what you're doing now? Did you go down a couple of lefts and rights and re-course correct and end up where you are now? Just give us a bit of an overview, if you will, Paula.
Think if we use your analogy, I've been on the country lane and done winding roads and many a dead ends. I'm currently in the financial sector and I work in the industry of insurance.
Right.
And I thrive in that environment. But actually, if we rewind and think, oh, okay, well, you left in 2014 and now it's 2025. What's happened and how did you get there? I actually left. I was pregnant, so I went through motherhood and I get bored very easily. So I started my own business up. So I was self-employed. I did have a business. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was very kind of creative. I did body casting. I made jewelry. It was me to a T. And then COVID hit.
Right.
And I quickly realized that actually being self-employed as a mum, and yes, my husband was in the military. So, we were, really privileged in the fact that the pay kid came in, but it knocked everybody for six. And I thought, I've got to really think on my feet here. What do I do? Do I ride the storm or do I adjust the sails? And I chose to adjust the sails.
Right.
And I went into employment. So I kind of didn't know what I wanted to be when I grown up. And I thought, oh gosh, I'm nearly 30 now and I still don't know what I want to be. So I kind of went back to what I knew, which I couldn't commit to sport like what you've been able to do when you left, because I had children. I had to have that anchor of being at home. So I went back to working alongside the military, but in an apprenticeship form. So I went into education. I was an endpoint assessor.
Right.
And it was fabulous. It was structured. It's exactly what I liked. So exactly what I needed. It was the familiarity and almost that kind of brotherhood. And then a friend mentioned about the financial sector, and I had no experience whatsoever. So I was like, I don't think it's for me. I don't think it's a bit of me. And she kept pursuing. She really did. And I was like, do you know what? If your name's not in the bag, you're not going to get drawn. I may as well just do it just for experience. I think it's always important now to push yourself out of that zone of comfort, which I thoroughly would do when I was in sport, and go in that stretch area. So I went for the interview. And I thought, well, do you know what? If I don't get it, it's not a problem. And then I got it. So I was like, okay. And the learning curve has been huge. If I was to say, it's been a comfortable ride, no, it hasn't, because I'm constantly going, oh my goodness, all these people that I'm around are super experienced. And there's me, and I'm from sport with no financial background. But actually, as we'll probably progress through this conversation, the attributes that you bring as an athlete absolutely play a part in terms of any sector that you choose. And it's just so happens that I kind of accidentally fell into finance.
Yeah, and I think it's always lovely to sort of frame what you're saying, Paula, not because you didn't say it articulate, you said it superbly articulate. It's just referring back to the conversations we have on a near daily basis. So we talk with sort of three groups, I suppose. The existing athletes who are like, what am I going to do? I'm thinking about transition, or I need to prepare for it. The recently retired, and then people who are perhaps a little bit further down the line but still feel a bit lost, that they haven't quite necessarily found their gap. And I think when you throw a blanket over all three, it's easy to think you step out, there's a one, key, you put it in the lock, turn it, and that's you set for life. And so it's interesting. Well, it's great to hear, in fact, that I had my own business. I went in still connected to the military and education and assessment and being very much connected to that brotherhood of the military still. And then I've moved on into another sector, which I had no prior experience. So there's three key gear changes there. And I think that's the norm. I'm not saying that's what has to happen, but that is more common than not with everybody that we speak that's walked down this path. And I think it's important for listeners to go, so it's okay to explore, to even enjoy something as you did with your business, and then say, now it's time for a change. It's okay to consider the implications of becoming a mum, and allowing that to change course slightly, change the tack of the sails, as you say. So I think that's a really nice analogy. And it gives people, I think, comfort to know, well, there's lots of different options. Now you took the next question sort of out of my mouth there, but one of the things that you will have had a great insight into, I suppose, has been an entrepreneur and being in that more structured employment and now moving into a sector where you had no prior experience is transferable skills. So I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'll throw it open to you as an open question can be. But what, in your experience, do you think you've taken from being in that bobsleigh and that Olympic environment into those roles? What comes to mind as a transferable skill that served you, Paula?
I think the very Billy basic that every single athlete will have without even thinking about it is that they're coachable. And that is hugely, hugely important. If you are coachable, it doesn't matter about your skill set as such because you've got an aptitude to learn. And I was very coachable. I mean, many of my coaches might chime in at this point and leave comments. She was an absolute nightmare. But, I do ask questions. But if you're coachable, you're able to learn, and if you're willing to learn, then the sky's the limit. It really is. I think the kind of athlete that I was, and I'm trying not to cast the net on everyone because everyone's got their own kind of unique quirkness.
Yes.
Is I'm very structured, so I work really well off of framework. I like to know exactly why and how things are happening, and often I would get my training program and it'd look horrific on a weekly planner with 15 sessions, and then I'd be asking why and whatnot, but I would do it religiously. So when we look and overlay my current situation, which is in the industry of insurance, the FCA has very rigid frameworks and rules, and I work well in those parameters. So as long as I've got clear understanding of what's needed, what's the strategy going forward, what's the goals, I can just layer it as if I was an athlete. So I'm essentially just going, right, okay, this is the success of the company. This is how I define my success. This is our purpose, right? I'm going to do it by doing X, Y, Z, and away you go. So all of the knowledge that was really difficult in the first instance of me going into a new setting and going, I don't understand any of this, was learnt really quickly. A couple of months, and actually I'd gone from that transition from that newbie that didn't know anything and everyone just knew me as the Olympian that joined the company to actually this girl has a solid basis of the knowledge, and actually the way that she goes around doing things I like. Because I'm not scared of asking questions. I've never been that person that is afraid of asking a stupid question. It's only the one that's not asked, that isn't it? And and I've always been able to make relationships. Often athletes have to work with people in teams that they might not necessarily gravitate to in the civilian world.
Absolutely.
Or they have to liaise with press, so they have an understanding that actually you show your best self. Yes, you're still authentic, but there's times to share all of yourself, and there's time to remain professional. And I think that carries you really in great stead, whatever sector you go into.
Yeah. No, fabulous answer. And the structured bit's an interesting one because one of the words we often strive for in our first conversations with athletes is clarity. Like taking the time through our coaching and mentoring work to help people understand who they are, what's important, what their value set is, what excites them, what repels them, to start trying to build a little bit of a roadmap. What are the logical conversations? Where can we go and get experience? And depending where they are on the journey, they might be very much still in the heart of competition, and this is a long-term plan. They may have been forced out of their sport through injury, etc. So you made a great point that I really like structure, and they're the sort of little hooks that I think it's important to start to build a plan on, because I like structure. Right, well, where does that take me? Now, interestingly, I suppose the dichotomy around that is probably to throw you back into working for yourself, because we get a lot of athletes as well talking about, well, I've got an entrepreneurial spark, I think, and I've got an idea and I want to do it. That world is particularly unstructured, isn't it? Because you're all on your own. Am I making? Am I creating? Am I marketing? Am I network building? Am I doing finance? To start with, it feels like, oh my word, I can go anywhere I want. There's very little structure. So I know you said about COVID being a major knock there, but I imagine that was quite a challenge for you then. If it's someone that likes structure, you look at those training schedules, I know what I'm doing, what I have to do. That must have challenged you a little bit, being in that entrepreneurial space where it's all on you.
Yeah, it did. I mean, I'm a constant oxymoron, I think. I do enjoy structure. I like to understand how I'm going to get from A to B, but I also like autonomy as well. So I've got my clear A to B, but the autonomy is how I execute it. So yes, building your own business is hard. I'm not going to lie and say, oh, it's easy, just do it. It is really, really hard, and it takes over your life probably as much as sports. So that's something that you need to really be aware of. But actually, if you're clear in where you want to be and you've got some kind of understanding of how you're going to execute it, it can be just as structured, but you have to be strong with your boundaries. And often what we find with athletes coming out is that they've given everything, that it's really difficult to start putting these boundaries in that's healthy for you, and if you're in employment, for your employer as well.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a nice perspective. And going back to that, asking the questions, because this is something that when you think about, well, you said so many things there that resonate. Building relationships, you're not always necessarily socially aligned or value aligned. You're brought together in a team. It doesn't mean you're all peas in a pod, but you find a way to align yourself, move towards a vision collectively, and have difficult conversations. I think within that, we're very, especially in Britain, we're very backward sometimes in just asking the obvious questions, and it creates all sorts of ripple effects. I think throw a blanket over that. It's all around communication for me, that most athletes don't realize they're actually pretty good communicators. They can have the difficult conversations. They can give and take feedback, as I'm sure you had to do in a team, about who was performing well and who wasn't. And that's really important in industry, because we spend a lot of time at the other end of the spectrum talking and working and coaching in industry. And there's some big gaps in terms of culture and communication and candor, and that sort of an analogy of the elephant in the room, the difficult conversation. The elephant's got so big, everyone just ignores it. So I think, just to, I suppose, reverberate what you said and ask you just to go a bit deeper on it, do you find that just that ability to be candid, to communicate effectively, all the things you did day in, day out in sport, are serving you well now in this sector?
Absolutely. I think, effective communication is hugely important. But I think as well, what piggybacks off the back of that, where maybe in, I always say civilian street, it's, out of sport,
Yes.
Is missing, is the emotional intelligence that comes with that. So having, we're quite empathetic in the fact that, we're selfish, that we need to be self-serving and make sure that we get to the pinnacle, which in my case was the Olympics. But we're also empathetic to understand that because I made it, maybe somebody didn't. And, once you've got those effective communications of making sure that you're able to talk to your coach, to your co-workers, to your co-athletes, to your press, whatever, it gives you a really good toolkit to then go into an employer and go, well, actually, when I'm in a stakeholder meeting, I can absolutely hold myself. I can absolutely put myself in their shoes, or I can, go to that helicopter view and do a 360 and go, okay, well, how does that affect other people before I, go down into my tunnel vision? And I think athletes are incredibly good at that, because they're so used to self-critiquing of how could I have got better? How could I have got 100th better that would have made me, go to bronze medal, let's say. We're constantly evaluating ourselves. So actually, when we look outwards and go, okay, well, this is a problem that I've been faced with, how can I make it better? We're just naturally wired to do it and do it well.
I agree. And I think, sorry, go on, Paula.
Oh, I was going to say, that's not a gift that's extended to everybody. It really isn't. And I only found that out from obviously walking the path of getting a big girl job.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you couldn't say it any better. And I think you've articulated it perfectly. And anybody listening can say, oh, well, I'm coachable. Yeah, I'm pretty good in community. I think I've got a pretty good ability to reflect. I think my emotional intelligence is good. So bringing it right back to what you said earlier in the conversation there, stepping into a sector of which you had no prior experience, you wrap all that back together, and that is why you've got to a point where you feel so comfortable. You've got that ability to communicate. You've got that ability to reflect. You don't fear asking questions. You're coachable. And that skills gap and knowledge gap will have shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. I'm sure you're still learning every day, but you no longer have that, oh, I've got no knowledge or experience. Now you're probably in a place where you feel relatively confident in that space, I would imagine.
I do. I think, if there's ever a point where you feel like you're not learning, I think you need to really look at yourself. I think there's always an opportunity to learn. So I don't sit here going, yeah, I've made it in life. This is, me set for life in the insurance industry. Every day is very much a school day, but I am most certainly set in the fact that people now come to me
Right.
for knowledge. And I think, well, actually, that means that perception wise, they must think that I've got an aptitude of knowledge here. So that's
Yes.
fine. And I think, it's really important as well. I've got loads of attributes that are not necessarily, um, or because I'm an athlete. So for me, I'm going, right, okay, where can I learn all this information for insurance?
Hmm.
And actually, what can I give back? Because I find XYZ really easy. And then we turn it into kind of more of a mentorship, because
Hmm.
then that's going to get me better in terms of the company. Ultimately, I'm giving back to other employees. They're obviously then thinking, oh my goodness, Paula's a really nice person, which I'd like to think I am. And yeah, and that's how you grow. That's how you
Yes.
build your, your integrity, the loyalty towards your co-workers. And you've got a lot to give. You really
Yes.
do.
And I think that's another great endorsement of the athlete for any employers listening, that not only do they come in and enhance things through their individual performance, but athletes often, to your exact point, enhance the culture and the team dynamic because they're used to that mentor-mentee relationship. Most young athletes, when they enter a bobsleigh team, a hockey team, a netball team, a rugby team, it doesn't matter, will have had senior players in the team that have looked out for them, put an arm around them, helped them learn the ways, the systems, the processes. And consequently, as they evolve in years and experience, they did the same. So it's very natural for athletes when they come into business to do exactly what you said, look to grow themselves, but look to grow the people around them. So there's certainly a rising tide lifts all boats analogy for bringing elite athletes, high performers into a sector, irrespective if they're experts in that sector yet, they will make a significant impact on the culture. So I think that's a great point, Paul. I've got to go back to that opening salvo that you mentioned, though, because I'm intrigued to go back. I know you very humbly just skip through it quickly, but you were in your sort of late teens, were you, when you were going for that world championship? So is that right? Were you 18, 19 at that point?
So I joined the team when I was kind of tandem between 18th and 19th birthdays, where
Right.
I entered the fold for GB.
Yes.
And then it was in 2011, so I'll have been in my early 20s.
Right,
Uh,
right. So
yeah,
still very young.
very
And
young. Yeah,
you've got all these funding things, as you said, you don't really understand swirling around. You've got
yeah,
your dad, unfortunately, unwell,
yeah.
and you're shooting to do something which had any other British female won that prior to you?
No, so
No.
we had the great success of Nicola Minicello winning the World Championships. But at that point, I was still very much kind of entry level, like, who's this new girl? She's big, she's fast, but she's really young. So it was always a case of, let's just put her through the Junior World Championships and see how she goes. And
Yes.
no one had ever done that previously. So
So
that was
that
kind
that pressure then, how because there's that all building around you, and obviously you stepped through, and to your credit, you won, which is amazing. It's we go out to transferable skills. It's just a moment in time, particularly because you were so young, and it's ground that's never been broken before. I suppose what did you take out of that? Because it's just another one of those illustrations of confidence, dealing with fear, dealing with pressure, dealing with adversity. And I'm a big advocate, unfortunately, wherever you go in life, business, professionally, challenge and adversity will always come. But the more sort of ability you have to look back at your journey, the more strength you can draw from that to say, well, if I've done that, I can do this. So that, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but must have done you a power good mindset, confidence, you name it, to step into that pressure and come out victorious on the other side.
It did, and everyone likes to win, and it's not everybody gets a success story. I think for me, there was so much going on that actually the execution of the race was probably the easiest part. I was able just to shut everything else down and think, well, actually, it's a really easy equation. I just have to push as fast as I can, drive the best I can, and everything else will come. You
Right.
can only control the controllables, which is
Yeah.
yourself. With bobsleigh, it's huge complexities in terms of, the ice temperature, the weather, all of that plays a part, but none of which I've got control over. So all I can do is push fast, drive fast, and then we'll see what comes. Everything else was just noise that I just had to block out.
Yeah, yeah, love it. And that is a life mantra for anybody listening. It's something I always draw upon in dissecting a challenge. What can you control and what can you not control? It sounds so obvious, but there's another phrase that I heard someone say years ago: common sense isn't always common practice. And
Yeah.
we're so used to saying, oh, I've got a problem personally or professionally, and then we burn all our energy up talking about and, you know, catastrophizing the worst case scenarios of things that we can't control. And instead of going back to, I love your simplicity of that, let's push hard, drive well, see what happens. And so I think that's a wonderful takeaway that we've all got. Well, focus on the controllables. That's a gift that we can all give to ourselves. And if we identify it's a non-controllable, well, we've got to let that go because we can't have an impact. It's just burning up our energy. So I think the transferable skills you've touched on and articulated fabulously, Paula. One of the other questions we throw at people is just a simple sort of cast yourself back in the time machine. You know, we all learn with the benefit of experience and lived experience, and that old analogy, we're all geniuses in hindsight. Well, for people that are still behind us on the path, people that are perhaps still in their sporting disciplines, I think this question is always particularly apt for them. So we always like to ask guests, is there something that comes to mind that if you were to have your time again, you say, well, I would do that. I would recommend do that. That really served me. And equally, is there something when you think about making that transition that you'd say, don't do that? With the benefit of hindsight, I look back and think, yeah, probably shouldn't have done that, or that didn't really serve me. So what comes to mind on that question for you, Paul? Something to advocate and say, yeah, do this served me, and don't do this perhaps with the benefit of hindsight didn't.
Yeah, it's a big question. I think, you know, I don't have any regrets as such because I am where I am. However, I think having stronger boundaries, if I could go back to 18-year-old Paula Jackson entering the GB fold, I'd say be strong with your boundaries. And what I mean by that is absolutely, I gave everything 100%. I was in a unique position that my now husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, was also in a similar, well, he was in the GB setup as well.
Right.
And what that meant is that we were 100% all in all the time.
Yes.
And that's exhausting. So I would say when I say strong boundaries, it's not about not giving 100%. You absolutely do need to give 100% to get to the, you know, the goal there, whatever you've set. But it's about saying, right, okay, it's okay to switch off, whether that's on an evening or whether at the end of a long, hard season, irrespective of the results, I am going to take a 1 month recovery and I am not going to do any gym sessions or whatever that deemed like, because it's too easy to give it your all. And then when that time comes after a decade and you've not put anything else in for your self-development other than trying to get this goal, it becomes a bit of a car crash at the end. So for me, I wish I'd have gone, right, okay, my healthy boundaries are at 8 o'clock, once I've done my sessions, once I've done my physio, my Pilates, all of that, it's going to be back to Paula, and Paula's going to invest 1 hour a night or 1 hour a week doing something that sparks joy that's not sport. Okay? Because I'm not going to lose who Paula Jackson is. And actually, if I'm thinking about Paula Jackson when she's, God forbid, in her 30s, I'm going to set up some kind of career or navigation or something that just sparks a bit of joy.
Yeah, and I think that's a lovely way of phrasing it, something that sparks joy, because there's no secret. Lots of people wrestle with identity and would be deluded to say that's not the case. From the most senior, most successful, you think, well, why would they struggle? They won World Cups or they won gold medals or they won world championships. But to your point, everything was invested in that and then it stops. It's like, who am I? What am I? So this investment in you, both, as you've very, very articulately once again said, the investment in terms of career development, but also just investment in you as a person, because you are more than just a bobsleigh pilot, obviously. And, you know, we talked to a rugby player. You're not just a rugby player, a cricketer, a netballer. That is a part of what you did. It's a chapter. And so everything that we're talking about today, everything around the philosophy of Athlete Transition Accelerator is about preparing for that next chapter. It doesn't mean you have to jump into that next chapter tomorrow. You might have years of competition in front of you, but invest a little bit in there. And it's amazing, as you say, it sounds so easy to say, doesn't it? An hour here, an hour there. But if you compound all those 2 or 3 hours a week over a decade of competition in sport, you've done some pretty serious investment in yourself. And yet, perversely, we get a lot of people, well, what difference will it make? An hour a bit here or there. It's not going to be that substantive. Well, it is when you compound it over the longer term. So I think that's a great answer on the don't in terms of boundaries. Is there anything that particularly comes to mind on the do side, Paula, where you go, well, that really worked for me?
Um, God, that one's really difficult because I expect every athlete to. I guess the do that I'll probably take away from me is you have to trust, and trust for me never came easy. But don't be afraid. So do ask questions.
Hmm.
If something doesn't feel right, do ask questions and live by the feeling of fortune favors the brave. So
Hmm.
that's not, hey, I'm just going to be stupid and put a punt on this. Like, be brave is
Yeah.
basically it. Ask questions, be brave, and actually fail fast because you'll learn much more than when you fail because you know what not to do rather than being hesitant and thinking, oh, I don't know, because you'll never learn like that. So
Yeah.
I think that's probably what I would always do. Ask questions, be brave, and fail fast.
Yeah, love it. Great advice. And that I'm peppering you today with questions, not giving you any time to think here. But another one
All
that
right.
we always enjoy to ask people towards the end of our conversations, Paula, is a bit of a quick fire. Just you've given some great advice today, but if we were to say to you, what's the best piece of advice you were ever given? Doesn't matter where it's come from, whether it's sporting discipline related, whether it's, life, personal, it's just a tap into your sort of knowledge bank, if you will. And if you were sharing the best piece of advice you've ever been given, what comes to mind?
It's one that you've probably heard when you're growing up, and you might think, well, that's not useful. But for me, it was an absolute defining moment in my like aha moment. And I remember I have a strong sense of injustice. I used to sweat the small stuff. I go, but that's not fair. And why is that there? And da da da. And Kate Goodger sat me down and said, Paula, life is not fair. And I know that I'd been hearing that from my mum and dad growing up, because growing up in Blackburn, it was just like, life's not fair, you'll just have to suck it up, blah, 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 blah. But hearing somebody that was completely unbiased and was there for me to navigate and said, life's not fair, it was almost like it was an aha moment. And in that moment, I thought, well, do you know what? No, it's not. So actually, I can identify, because my strong sense of injustice, that isn't fair. But let's move on because I can't
Mhm.
control it. So it's control the controllables. But that phrase that came from Kate Goodger, I owe her an awful lot because it's still something that I hold now is simply life's not fair.
And it broke the pattern, didn't it? So rather than wallowing in that frustration and that sense of injustice and going round and round in the controllables, it's like,
Yeah,
well, I know it isn't. It is what it is. So now I either stay where I am or I focus on the controllables and move forward as best I
yeah,
can. So yeah, I love that. Great advice. That's a really nice one. And you can link it to somebody specifically as well, even better. So you're probably someone that reads widely. Listening to you today in terms of your ability to ask questions and constantly learn, and we should never stop learning. I agree with that. So I don't know if this is relevant to you or not, but nonetheless, we've had some interesting answers. So if you were to make a book recommendation, it's not about necessarily transition. It's just about a book that's made an impact on you, a bit like that piece of advice. Is
yeah.
there a particular book that comes to mind that you're like, yep, that had an impact on me. I'd happily recommend that one.
Yeah, I think there's two. Chimp Paradox, obviously, is it resonates. It's such a simple kind of module that you can kind of understand yourself, and you think, oh,
Yes.
right, we still use it in this household. My chimp's called Mary, John's called Charlie, and whenever we're
Nice.
kind of stepping out of line, they'll go, oh, okay, am I talking to Mary right now? And so it's something that
I like
embodies
it.
us already now. And
Yeah.
also, what I'm currently reading, which I'm nearly done, is Let Them, which
Right.
is the Let Them theory. And I think, them two together, it gives you a really strong setting in terms of how you can manage yourself.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to check out. I've read the Chimp Paradox, but Let Them's a new one, so I shall certainly be digging that one out. So I think from my perspective, Paula, it's been a fabulous conversation. Is there anything that we've not touched on that you thought, oh, I would have liked to have shared this insight or this anecdote? I mean, your advice and your answers have been super and very insightful, but is there anything that you think we haven't covered that you'd like to cover?
Um, I mean, I think it's really important to highlight for women. Um, I went through the transition pregnant. I left the sport pregnant because it wasn't set up. And I think that's another layer of fear that might be
Hmm.
on female athletes for sure. So I just want to kind of, rest assured that there are options out there. It might be quite scary in the fact that you're like, you get through this pregnancy, I'm losing my identity, because actually, to forewarn you, yes, you lose your identity as an athlete, but then you're almost not forced, because that's the wrong language is important. You almost are transformed into your mum. And it's just telling them that the superpower is you're not just mum, you come from a place of expertise. And actually it is very difficult whilst you're pregnant, leaving and trying to transfer your skills in career, but it is absolutely doable. And that's your superpower. You are able to multitask like no other human.
Yes, well said. And when we deal with a lot of female athletes that are going through that, and it's truly inspirational. But I think on that point of identity, you struck on something else really powerful there, is that our identity is multifaceted. There are so many parts to us, as you've alluded to. You are a wife, you are a leader, you are a colleague at work, you are a mum, you are a former Olympic bobsleigh pilot. There's so much nuance to it. It's just lifting your head and realizing it's not just this. And we had a guest recently who talked about the simple question of who says your sporting chapter has to be your best. Even when you've had the most wonderful career, there's this natural sense of, well, what now? Nothing can be as good as this. And that's not to diminish or demean anybody's sporting chapter. But if you embrace that mindset, it sort of puts you on the back foot. But if you say, wow, that was amazing, I loved it, there's some lows, but there were some undoubted highs, I really enjoyed that, and now the sky's the limit, who knows where I'm going to go in these future decades. That sense of opportunity and curiosity, and as you've said repeatedly and really wisely, ask questions and explore and learn, I think it changes your mindset and your feel for what's ahead, rather than, well, the best days are behind me and it's all fear and trepidation, to I'm looking forward excitedly and confidently. And so I think that's particularly pertinent for ladies that are wrestling with that loss of identity and also going through that seismic adjustment of becoming a mum.
Yeah.
Paula, it's been lovely talking to you. Really, really enjoyed your wisdom and what you've shared today. If somebody wants to reach out and connect with you, what's the best way to do that? Are you particularly prominent on something like LinkedIn, or how would people find you?
Yeah, so you'll find me on LinkedIn. I can't remember my handle. I think it's Paula Jackson GB. And you'll see my catfish photo in there. That might not look like what I look like now, but you're more than welcome to drop in my DMs. I'm more than happy to help or give any kind of advice if you feel that it's, valuable.
Perfect. Well, we'll make sure we'll put your links and things into the show notes. So thank you once again. Your insights have been fabulous. Wish you the very best of luck with the ongoing development in your career, and thank you for sharing your time with us today.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us this week on our ATA podcast. If you found this conversation insightful and it resonates with your journey, please subscribe, follow the show, and stay connected with us for more insights, resources, and information on how we at ATA are supporting your preparation for life beyond the game.